Hello and welcome, my name is Trismegistus, and today we're going to be reading through and speculating about the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 417, Space Age Development. Posted by Kovarex. Hello, we usually show finished stuff in Friday Facts these days, but I personally always like to have a peek behind the curtains and see the temporary mess there. This motivated me to do some kind of overview of how the overall expansion development felt from my perspective. If you're like me, you might appreciate it. It's a bit of a throwback, this one, actually. There used to be more sort of Friday Facts like this. As he says, they have tended to do sort of completed systems and final designs in this current set of Friday Facts, but back in the day there used to be quite a lot of, well, what do you think of this? And here's an idea, and this is what we're thinking. And I always used to really enjoy those Friday Facts. They weren't necessarily perhaps the most dramatic, but I really loved that sort of behind the scenes, and this is very much a behind the scenes Friday Facts. Our story starts in February 2021 with Friday Facts 365 when we announced the plan to do the expansion pack. Friday Facts 365, eh? Crikey, 2021. Wow. The first year, 2021, creating the skeleton. Firstly, we focused on hiring, and the team was doubled to almost 30 people, with the graphics department notably expanding from 2 to 8 people. Creating the plan. Vertical slice. The first and obvious step was a lot of discussions about the high-level plan of the whole expansion. Since we wanted to iterate the design as soon as possible, we used the expression vertical slice very often. The vertical slice was meant to be the most bare-bones way of playing through the expansion, so we could start improving based on the feedback. Retrospectively, this was a very good idea. So I guess I should probably explain vertical slice. There won't be too much commentary, I don't think, from me on this one. Famous last words, obviously. I'm thinking about doing the speculation in a separate video because there's quite a lot in the pictures and I don't think I've got the time to do the edit today. So if this is in the video, note that there's going to be another video later where I go into speculation about some of the things. A vertical slice then is basically, it's usually considered a milestone. If you've not done any sort of project management, you're not familiar with that, you usually have milestones throughout a project where they represent you having completed a kind of significant proportion of the game. In a lot of commercial contracts, a milestone would represent a point where you get paid, essentially. So if you are designing a system and building something, you might say, right, well, once we've laid, building's actually quite a good example, but once we've laid the foundations, that's a milestone and we'll get paid for that. Then once we've built, say, the first floor, that's another milestone and we'll get paid for that. Once we've built the second floor, you get the idea. You create a set of milestones to represent that you are progressing the project as you need to. A vertical slice then is usually one of those milestones, and maybe several. You may do several vertical slices. But basically the idea is if you imagine you've got all of the systems in the game and that they are kind of horizontal, we lay them out horizontally, basically like a list. Think of a list of systems. So, well, we're maybe just thinking about it in terms of the planets. So you're going to have 5 planets, so you've got a list of the 5 planets. And the vertical slice then cuts across all of those and says, right, well, we want to be able to visit each of those planets and be able to do the main mechanic on each of the planets, and that will be our vertical slice. They won't have the proper graphics in, they won't necessarily work properly, the recipes may be, not broken as such, but they may just be lots and lots of placeholders with just stuff in, stuff out. But the idea is that you can go to those planets and you can do the central mechanic on those planets that we're currently thinking about. The idea then is to get a better picture of the full game, essentially. Typically a vertical slice will be produced for a milestone for a paid project, and so a publisher would basically be looking for one of those to see, right, well, what is in this game? What are we doing? What's it look like? How does it work? And to be able to give feedback then. And Kovarex is the kind of game designer, the lead on the game, wanted to be able to have a look at all of those systems that they were thinking about and essentially start making decisions of, well, is this fun? Does this work right? Is this what I want? Etc, etc. Bearing in mind that, as I say, they'd all be quite work in progress and quite early. Obviously, Wooby is it's an independent company, and so it doesn't have a publisher, so it doesn't necessarily have a requirement to do a vertical slice, that would come from outside. So the point he's basically making there is that decision to actually follow that general type of approach was a good idea, because it allowed them to do some of the stuff they're talking about later on, where the best example is Falgora, where we already know they reworked the mechanics, basically. So it's that type of thing that they were able to assess by doing this vertical slice. We hired Arundel, and he was keen on helping with the game design part. Because of his vast experience with modding and unprecedented productivity, he was always able to provide a fully working draft of the planet and its mechanics very fast. If you don't know, just to reference, Arundel is I don't know that he's the sole developer, but he's kind of the lead on the space exploration mod, which is the one I'm currently playing on stream. And it's a really kind of in-depth and detailed mod. But he also did things like alien biomes, so a lot of mods basically. If possible, he often wrote some of the mechanic drafts with Lua scripting to have the testable version before it was accepted and properly integrated into the engine in C++. Arundel's drafts were always over the top when it comes to gameplay complexity, so we usually started by simplifying it to half the original size, and then half again soon after. But it was way easier to shave off from a prototype, leaving the best bits, rather than creating things from scratch. Planets. The next thing to do was planets, as most other stuff relates to them in one way or another. The class Planet was created on the 26th of January 2021, so it was basically a few days before the first expansion pack announcement. A class is a structure in programming, basically, so when it says the class Planet, Planet is a class that they created. I'm not going to go too in-depth with programming, but when he says class, he's basically talking about a sort of a type of thing in the game, basically. We always knew we wanted to have an expansion based on going to different planets, so the support for independent surfaces was in the game code for years already. Since mods were often using multiple surfaces, it was reasonably tested already. This saved us a lot of trouble, but there was still a lot of things to tweak to make the independent surfaces and planets work well enough to our standards. So yeah, there's quite a lot of mods. I think one that just popped into my head was that there's a mod to do tunnels for trains, and it uses multiple surfaces, so the train goes into a separate surface. Surface is obviously literally the surface that you play on, so the Nauvis map is a surface, and of course the idea is that planets are effectively different surfaces. In the context of the game they are remote, but obviously in code they're just a block of surface basically all together. At this time we made the decision that planets will be prototype based and tightly related to the progression, as opposed to exploration of a semi-infinite, randomly generated planets. So the distinction there being the surface of Nauvis is a procedurally generated surface. So it has a set of rules through which it draws the map as you explore. And I think the idea is that when they talk about prototypes related to progression, is that effectively they're kind of encapsulating a set of parameters for that individual planet. So for example, Volcanus, you have the lava, you have the, I don't know if they're called something different, but the different cliffs. These parameters kind of define the prototype, what the planet is. Whereas in a semi-infinite randomly generated planet, what they mean is that you could turn up and it could, when you land, it could look just like Nauvis, because there would be just randomization of, like a new biome and a new material, etc., that could be spawned on any planet. So that's very much like how space exploration basically seems to work. There do seem to be some restrictions on it, but you can go to anywhere and get iron. You can go to anywhere and get copper. As I say, the sliders appear to be set, so it doesn't generate, for example, but there's no real difference really between any of the planets. There's no there's no lava, there's no oil sands, etc., so there's not properly different surfaces and mechanics on the different planets in SpaceX. There's different resources, but it's not quite the same as having the only place you will find lava is Volcanus. So we just decided on the main theme of each of the planets and started laying the groundwork needed for that, like the possibility to specify certain conditions of where certain recipes can be crafted, different properties of the planets affecting things like solar panels' power, and also UI support to be able to switch between places comfortably. Space platforms. Space platforms were the second most important part of the structure, as they connect the planets and are related to other game subsystems. Elevated rails. We knew that elevated rails just have to be part of the expansion from the start. Since this was one of the biggest challenges of the expansion, it felt like a good goal to start it as soon as possible. Spoilables. We didn't know the exact recipes and content we would need for Gleba, but we already knew spoilables would be needed, so the support was also implemented in the first year. So that's fascinating. So basically, space platforms are pretty obvious, and we know from back in the day there was a Friday Facts talking about how they would do space platforms, so that was clearly just them putting in place what they'd already thought of. Elevated rails is clearly a decision that they made very early on then, and decided to go down that route, as it were, rather than tunnels, for example. The fact that spoilables were in the game very early is fascinating. That suggests that that's a mechanic that they've kind of been working with since, almost since the beginning of deciding to do the expansion. The thing that isn't mentioned there is quality. So we know that quality was actually put in the game kind of before they even started on the expansion. When it was introduced way back at the start of this series of Friday Facts, they did explain that basically they'd kind of been working on that in parallel just with the normal game. And that really, I guess in a way, it's like an ancillary thing to the expansion, as in it's like an add-on feature. And I know they've done elevated rails in such a way that you can turn them off and on, but, having seen Fulgora and Volcanus with their particular surfaces, I'm not sure if you're playing the expansion, they really are optional. It's more to give you the option of playing a vanilla game with elevated rails. I think that's why they've made that one a separate thing, because I think in practice, it's not really optional for the expansion. You could do it, but you're just going to have a lot harder of a time, I think. So yeah, spoilables in the game almost from the very beginning. That does make a lot of sense in a way, because it's a very different challenge. I have said on stream and stuff that you can actually defeat it in the same way. You just do volume basically and just accept that the spoiler, a lot of it's going to spoil. But yeah, if you think of it more in terms of just-in-time type logistics, that's a very different challenge to the volume logistics of the current system. So it's sort of understandable why it came in quite early. The second year, 2022, first playable prototype. After a year, we had another update, Friday Facts 367. The TLDR version is big parts of the game are playable, and we are approaching a state where we can playtest from start to finish, with an asterisk of in the most bare bones way possible. So I think basically this means that is the vertical slice, the point where they reach that vertical slice, which is kind of impressive in a way to get that far in a year. But yeah, as it's about to reveal that quite a lot of it was prototype and concept and perhaps didn't fulfill the initial vision of what they were trying to go for, so they needed to rework it. The first playthrough. That statement was true, as it was around this time when I started the first brave attempt to play the whole expansion from start to finish. The playthrough was happening over the span of 7 months, and it was nowhere near possible to actually play from start to finish at the beginning of it. But the idea was to try to push through by filling in all the gaps between the individual pieces of functional content as I move forward in the game. So that to me feels a bit like the whole, I often refer to it, the part in The Wrong Trousers of Wallace and Gromit, where Gromit is laying the track in front of the train. It's actually like a very old gag. But yeah, it feels a bit like the idea was to kind of lay the track as they were going. So Kovarex was start at the beginning, and the idea was to maybe focus attention on, he now needs to get into space, so we need to put something in place so that can happen, even if it's a bit janky and wobbly and what have you. And then he can get to the first planet and place that, what we've got there. But he needs to get to the second planet, the third planet, and therefore we need to build a prototype for them. And obviously they'll have had bits and pieces on the go, or bits and pieces that worked for each of those, and so they're effectively sort of just joining the dots, as I say, kind of laying the track so that you can get to the next destination basically. When I started, the planetary logistics part wasn't functional yet, so I had to expand the factory and test other things like elevated rails and quality before going to space. Since I built bigger on Nauvis and I wanted to test elevated rails and the train system more, I was more motivated to improve it. This is when I made train interrupts and clone and make the train groups. They go on to say this. It's interesting that the playthroughs seem to have inspired quite a lot of the quality of life features. I've been mentioning, I don't know about speculating, but I've been mentioning that we've had a lot of quality of life stuff in this Friday Facts. And I think this is what the essential motivation was, that, as I say, it kind of goes on to explain that the first playthrough was very long. And a big part of that was kind of a lack of some of these quality of life features that they put in. So a lot of those are about making the game more playable, more sensible in the duration of the, how long it takes to finish. Space logistics. The first version of space logistics was absolutely horrible to use, as you had several semi-unrelated buildings on the space platform called space platform ejectors. This screen capture, I guess, is showing that. It says that in the caption, each ejector was an individual building with independent inventory and semi-independent requests. I'm guessing the PCEs are the ejectors, but if they're called space platform ejectors, I'm not quite sure why they've got the acronym PCE. Maybe that's a translation thing, that it means something else in a different language, but yeah, so I'm assuming it means these, because these seem to have different things in each ejector, each block, where we know that it treats the entire storage of the platform as one in the end game. I think what I'm going to do, because this is such a long Friday Facts, is that I'm going to break this up into two pieces. So we'll have a separate Friday Facts where I properly look at these pictures. There aren't too many things that, I don't think there are too many Easter eggs basically, but there are a lot of things on here that I find fascinating and that it's fun to speculate about in a sort of retroactive sense, that as in, what did it mean? I don't think they mean a lot for the current game, but I think it's interesting to speculate about what some of the stuff is and mechanics they considered. So I would do that as a separate video, because this one is going to be a monster, to be honest with you. Working with this was a pain, similar to the way things were supplied into space, which was described later in Friday Facts 381. So it was janky, but hey, it was something we could build on. And again, coming back to that point of vertical slice, get something in the game that is functional in a way, work out what's good about it, what's bad about it, what you want to change, what you want to keep, and iterate from there. We then just got another picture of the space platform, and it just says, look, the engines have flames now. And that's just referring to the orange to yellow triangles at the bottom there. These are the engines. These, by the way, are the grabber arms. We've already seen that that's what those were on the Friday Facts that talked about them, so we know those are grabber arms. But yes, these are the engines at the bottom here, and they've got flames. Pushing through planets. Vulcanus was the first planet to test, as it didn't have very specific technical requirements compared to the other planets. Gleba with its agriculture and Forgora with lightning weren't ready yet. So this is the very, very, very early iteration of Vulcanus, and it just says bare bones Vulcanus with temporary elevated rails graphics. What we can see here is that they have a kind of surface in for the lava crust type stuff, I can't remember what they called it, the general building area. And they also have the lava itself in. It doesn't look radically different to what's in there now, which is kind of interesting. These are the elevated rails they're talking about, and the sort of, what's that, taupe, grey, yellowy type stuff are the temporary versions, or the early versions of the ramp, and then these are the actual support structures. Those have both changed a lot and a little. These look very similar, sort of structure-wise, to what the ramps do. Looks very similar structure-wise to what they've got, although they look visually very different. But the actual elevated support pieces look really quite different. And then we've got a basic mining setup here or a basic station setup for a mine where material is coming in and being loaded into the train. Gleba was the second one. Regarding the landing pads, you could see one of the problems of the original design, where every landing pad was individually accepting some cargo from space. This had three main problems. 1. It was very annoying to manage each of the item requests individually. 2. Since the landing pads were not logistic providers yet, we tended to have this repeated pattern of landing pad to passive provider chest everywhere. 3. Since you could build landing pads anywhere, it felt a little bit too cheesy to be able to drop items from space anywhere needed. This is one of the reasons why now we have just one expandable landing pad per planet. Caption just says here, bare bones Liber with early landing pads and way too many harvestable types of plants. I'm pretty sure that these various structures here and around are these temporary graphics for the plants. And just to explain, I believe these to be the landing pads. So these sort of blue structures in here, because as it mentioned that they have a passive provider into which they're outputting out items, and that's what's going on here. So you've got a bulk inserter is going to be called, the stack inserter, putting into a passive provider chest, which then bots can access from everywhere. And it appears the original concept they had was that every single item, or effectively each landing pad, was kind of like a single request chest, where it could request from space, essentially, send it. This is too small for this video probably, but there's roboports in there and green belts in some of those and level 3 speed modules there. So these are clearly requesting in individual items, and then the platforms would turn up and those would get delivered. That means you've got to spam down a hell of a lot of these in order to supply a planet with stuff. So I can understand that difficulty. It's pretty boring in design terms. It's just a pad and an inserter and a chest, a bit like a bot-based build. But also, you could put these anywhere, clearly. There was clearly no implementation of planetary orbits or anything like that, and I don't think there will be in the final game. But there's no concept of, well, your platform's over on this side of the planet, and what you've put down as your requester is over there, so it'll either take time to come round or something like that. You could literally put them anywhere you wanted, and so you're effectively shortcutting all of the design choices you might be making. And it's like, why bother having trains if the things I want are available on Nauvis? I can stick them in a platform, the platform can deliver them exactly where I want. And while that's probably not the best idea for, I don't know, iron plate or something like a roboport or some other expensive item, getting them delivered directly and exactly where you want is probably just shortcutting too much of the complexity. It is a logistics game after all. But as I say, we'll talk about this in a separate video, all these what appear to be apples in chests and all that sort of stuff. Fulgora was the third planet to visit. With its original base game-like design, it's the place where I started to be sceptical. More later. And here we see again the first prototype version, I guess, of Fulgora, and it just says bare bones Fulgora with temporary elevated rail graphics and vanilla-like ore mining. And this was, as I say, the problem that Kovarex kind of hit upon, was that the reuse of the basic ore mining mechanic was just repetitive and dull, basically. And that's what we see. So we've got good old-fashioned electric furnaces. We've got drills off of the edge of the picture here, feeding in copper ore, producing copper plates, sticking it into a regular old train. We do, interestingly, and I say, I'll talk about this in more depth, but this is quite close to the final design. This appears to be the lightning conductor, so it appears that the lightning mechanic was on Fulgora for quite a while, which makes sense given they've called it Fulgora. But yes, we've got the elevated rails going on here. Note the clipping of the graphics through the thing. And yeah, so just a train turning up, trying to pick up copper plate, and off it goes. How is it different to Nauvis? Long story short, 7 months later, with 370 hours clocked in the save, I was finally able to get to the end screen. Shortly after that, we had an office LAN party where we tried to do a multiplayer playthrough to get more feedback and also to test the multiplayer. We played from Monday to Friday, and we barely got to the last planet, quite exhausted on the last day, never really being able to finish the whole thing. Now, one of the things to note on that is, it depends how they did it. Maybe they weren't all playing on exactly the same map. Maybe one group played on Fulgora and one played on Vulcanus, and not clear how much organisation there is. But what I'm basically saying is, if the team had expanded, and I guess not everyone would have played, but if the team had expanded to 30 people, and it takes them an entire week of people who are presumably pretty experienced at playing Factorio, maybe not speedrunners, but able to play the base game through in the 20 to 40 hour type range, and it takes them an entire week, Monday to Friday, and it sounds like they were probably doing longer than 9 till 5 standard days, just sort of playing as and when they could and they wanted to. and as say 30 people doing that, and they couldn't actually finish the whole thing. Yeah, so clearly there was more problems than just, because obviously Kovarex is saying that he focused on Rails and he focused on quality while he couldn't go to the other planet. So 370 hours could have been explained by that. But no, it turns out that it's too much, too complex, too grindy, I guess, too much repetition for even a big group of players to play through. The first iteration and conclusion. Finishing the expansion for the first time was good and bad at the same time. Good because now we had a base and it could only get better from here on out. The graphics, sound and music would be updated. The UX, which is user experience if you never encountered that acronym before, but the UX of the new systems would be improved and the game would be balanced overall. All good. Bad because I had some serious doubts about the expansion pack concept, mostly explained in Friday Facts 399. Just to remind you, this was the one about like the mechanic on Falgora of the lightning, essentially. And it was explained here that in this first impressions part, I think it was, that basically they used to just, Falgora as it showed on that early preview thing was just basic mining, and that there was nothing really interesting to it, basically. So we've switched, and this is the key change, that we've gone from resources to trash. Some alien left trash, and you have to sort the trash, and that's a different way of doing things. There are a huge number of problems, and while the vast majority had a clear solution, some of them were different. Firstly, it was too long. 370 hours is way too much, even considering the teething problems. Secondly, it was too repetitive. This is before the Falgora and other changes. Thirdly, some of the mechanics were too clunky or annoying to use when scaled up. For example, the space platform logistics, the trains, etc. And fourth, the sheer scale of the things needed to be done was just too big and it often felt too grindy. I would imagine also, and sort of implied in that, because one of the things you always got to remember with the expansion is it's not just for us experienced players. I'm saying us because my audience seems to be quite experienced with the game, but it's not just for people who've played 1,000 hours, 2,000 hours, whatever. It's for everyone. And so if you're a new player and you've just seen this expansion coming out, you've always maybe been interested in Factorio, but you hesitated on buying it. Suddenly there's this new expansion. It's got space things in it, which is more appealing maybe. So you buy both the base game and the expansion. You launch into the full game, because it shouldn't ever be the expansion shouldn't be it shouldn't be like one of the big mods, one of the overhaul mods, where the advice is play the base game first, maybe a couple of times, and then dive into the simpler of the overhaul mods and sort of build up from there. It can't be like that, because it's a purchased product. Someone is buying the full game with the expansion. They should expect to be able to play through from beginning to end and not hit any kind of brick walls, which is obviously a little bit of a thing for Factorio anyway. It has a few of those, but conceptually that's what it should be. It shouldn't be a gated off thing that you can only do if you're 1,000 hours into the base game. So there is a sort of a side risk on that one of it being too intimidating essentially, and too much for new players. When you see a tech tree that has 250 things to research rather than 120 things to research, then that's quite a lot of difference. The conclusion was a very specific set of guidelines for the rest of the development. Firstly, the game progression needs to be faster, mostly by lowering the cost of stuff, reducing unnecessary recipe steps, and increasing quality of life capabilities. So make it cheaper so you can make more quicker. Make the recipes a bit simpler so that you don't have to do too many intermediate steps, which is what a lot of overhaul mods do. They make a lot of intermediate steps. And increase quality of life capabilities. So, as I said earlier, I think that's where and why we've got so many quality of life things, that it was just too much work, too much complexity, too unintuitive, too difficult to do a lot of stuff. And that's why it took a lot of time as well, not just because of the fundamental complexity. Secondly, the planet-specific gameplay needs to be more distinct. This is when the Falgora change was done. Volcanus was altered to get basic resources from lava to avoid copper, iron, stone mining sites. And on Gleba, plants you harvested were reduced from 12 to 2. Crikey. We also allowed the usage of planet-specific producers to be exported to other places, which greatly increased the motivation to expand, and also made the progression faster and more rewarding as these machines are so strong. So yeah, it sounds like not only, reading between the lines slightly there, where we know that the recipes are kind of locked to certain planets, certain surfaces, the example sort of being that only green belts can be built on Vulcanus and only foundries can be built on Vulcanus, meaning as in manufactured on there. And it sounds like originally you could only place them on those planets as well. So you could only use green belts on... Oh, it says machines, doesn't it? So maybe it was just, you could use green belts anywhere, but you couldn't take a foundry off of Vulcanus. Clearly that was, a particularly good change because we have seen a lot of machines being used on different planets. So clearly if you couldn't do that and you had to rely on the basic processing, it was a bit painful to play it through. Fascinating. The third year, 2023, The Grind. I played the game from start to finish once again. It took 240 hours, which is still way too much. But it needs to be considered that I went quite heavy with the factory size, trying to get almost everything in legendary quality, with a goal of 1 million science per minute. Crikey. I haven't reached 1 million science per minute yet, but I might get there before we release. So yeah, that feels like a megabase playthrough then, and a quality megabase at that. So 240 hours, that does sound like a long time, but not unreasonable, I guess, for if you're making everything or trying to make almost everything quality and also hit 1 million science per minute. 240 hours is getting into the right ballpark. Overall, it was shorter than the original 370 hours, and mainly it felt more fun. That's probably the most important part. Most of the work probably went into thousands of little things, but let me name some of the more significant changes. Explaining the new stuff. We realised we needed a better way to understand the new parts of the game, so Factoriopedia was created, which is talked about in Friday Facts 397. Since the mechanics were stabilised, we started to cover them with new tips and tricks, and while we were on it, the overall capabilities of these were improved. Overall capabilities are meaning of tips and tricks. So basically, we are now able to show GUI interactions in the simulations. I find it kind of cool that we actually have 2 complete independent active UI states in the game, one in the simulation and one being controlled by the player. So what that's basically getting at is, when they do the tips, if you never use them, they're actually pretty good, the tips and tricks, because they give a lot of them are like challenges for you to do. I only ever really looked at them a lot later on, because by the time they were introduced, I already had like 1,000 hours in the game. But there were a couple of things in them I did learn that I hadn't appreciated, but because it makes you do like little mini tests with trains and stuff like that. Anyway. But yeah, so basically what they're saying is that what they actually have now is like a simulation of the actual GUI. So if they're saying, click here, it can actually simulate, clicking here on the panel, or, if you're going into submenus and stuff like that, or doing drop downs, it can do that in the actual, in the actual game now. And it sounds like it's not just a recorded video. It's an interactive thing. So perhaps, if it's saying you click here and a drop down appears and it demonstrates that, and then you can do it yourself. And it says, have a go, and you do it basically. So it sounds like that's what they're going for, rather than, just a video or, say, the interactions they had before. And it says, we also made a much more powerful skip trigger system and reviewed practically all of the tip triggers to be more precise. That's a bit of a mouthful. I think the skip trigger, I think that means as in skipping the step, so you can just skip through it. But the tip triggers is when it basically, I say, if you never really observed it, there's like a little pop-up that happens in the bottom left, and it's one of the, I would say it's one of the problems with it at the moment, in that it's off down in the left-hand corner, and I think it just, doesn't it put a little exclamation point or something? It doesn't really drag a lot of attention to it, and it's perhaps maybe not part of the problem they identified. Maybe it wasn't exactly timed to what you were doing. So, maybe when it popping up the train tutorial, it wasn't precisely timed to you putting down the first train or something like that. So, sounds like they've done a bit of work to improve that. Just as a general thing, Factoriopedia is something I can't wait to get my hands on. I've used a lot of these, factory planners and FNAE and all these. recipe book is possibly the best one I've had a go at, but I don't really like any of them. The problem really I know is that they're trying to like pull information from the game, from API, and display it as best they can. Whereas obviously they can integrate it better into the core game, the actual systems, the actual information. The devs can do that themselves, as it were. And I mean, there's things like you could do like calculations and stuff in it, or show maths that I'm sure could be done better under the hood than kind of by a mod, basically. So, and I say, I think it's going to be hugely useful, particularly now that we have so many recipes for so many things. It's going to be easy to just forget how to make something, and having that resource is going to be quite useful, I think, in reality, especially when you're trying to learn how to play it. Gameplay and UI. We finished the first iteration of the Gleba enemy, to be shown later. Interesting. We made further improvements to the remote view, as it is used more and more in the expansion. The logistics groups were done and properly integrated into the refactored version of the space logistics. So the update of what is needed in the system of import planet to platforms to export planets could be done by a single user action. That's a part of the game we've not really heard a great deal about, how you actually do interplanetary logistics. I've been kind of assuming a lot of it works in the same way as trains, that you have schedules and you can do logic-based checks on the platforms, as in, when it's empty, leave, or when a certain amount of an item gets below a certain amount, then leave, or what have you. But in terms of how you request things between planets, we haven't really got a lot of information. We do know that obviously radars can now send, red and green signals, which tends to imply that that system could be scaled to planets, that you could send signals between planets. But we don't know, so it'll be interesting to see how all of that works. And it sounds like that was one of the key changes to make the space platforms, more fun, essentially. The Asteroid Catcher. Finishing the Asteroid Catcher from Friday Facts 385 was a big deal, mainly because we were very cautious about its logic being extremely light on performance. Seeing it in-game was one of the big milestones in the way the platform felt. If you don't remember, I guess what they're talking about there is because it's doing this type of magic, where the arm is actually swinging round and grabbing things. And the basic concern, it sounds like, was that this could be not very good for performance, that especially because you got to remember, quality versions of these have multiple arms. So you could put, 10 on a platform, and that's already 10 arms, and then each one could have 5, so you could have 50 arms just on one small area of a platform. And if it's a big harvesting platform, it could end up with hundreds of arms on it, I would guess. So the basic point is that because it's doing this animation and it's doing it via logic, this isn't a pre-calculated path as such. I mean, it is pre-calculated when it sets off, but it's not got defined. It's not like an inserter where it's going from left to right. It's having to work out, well, this is where the chunk is, and go and get the chunk each time it wants to grab a chunk. So the idea was that this could be, or the fear was that this would be so so complex and so difficult to calculate and so poor in performance that it would limit platforms. They could have ended up having to fix that, for example, by saying, right, you can't have more than 2 grabbers on a platform. That's a fundamental limit. Or they could have made grabbers so expensive that you could only build, 10 across the entire duration of the game. So there would have been ways of limiting it, but of course they didn't want to do that. They want people to just build what they're going to build, Graphics. The looks of the planets were getting more into official shape. The space platform wasn't just grey squares anymore. The sound of a lot of the new effects were covered, as well as a lot of old things in the backlog. Most of the machines became fully animated final versions of what they were supposed to be. I guess just to mention, backlogging is a type of development, essentially, and what you do, basically, it's interesting. It's part of something called Agile, and I don't know if they do actually run Agile, but basically what you do is essentially just create a list, and it says called backlog, that is essentially, these are the things we haven't done yet. They don't matter in the sense of they're not being there doesn't break anything, and we'll get to them when we get to them. It's quite a funny thing with Agile, because the sort of ethos of it is you can develop any piece of software infinitely. You know, you can just keep adding things to it. You can keep developing it. You know, things like Twitter and all these apps that have been there and never had a version 2. Stuff just gets bolted on and added on and changed and da-da-da-da. And you can do that almost infinitely. And it's why you do get to the point where they try and clean slate things and they say, right, that, it's too broken. It's too janky, basically. It's too messy. No one actually knows how it works anymore. Let's start with a fresh piece of paper. All the things we know we can do, we'll build in from the beginning and make them better and more efficient and not janky, and off we go. But what you do normally is say, while you're developing that version of that piece of software, you maintain a backlog and you say, right, well, if we get to a point where we've done all the main features that the client is requesting or what have you, we've got a bit of time, then we'll do these other things. But in a way, as I say, it's like an acknowledgement that software development in particular is very difficult to predict the time of. It's not like if you're laying a slab of concrete or something, you can pretty much work out the time it takes for that concrete to dry, given various factors. So you can lay it and then go away and come back when it's dry. You can't do that with software dev in a lot of cases. You'll have a lot of experience. A lot of experienced people will be able to estimate pretty accurately how pretty accurately how much time will be required. They won't be accurate all of the time. So you can often start working on bits and pieces that just keep uncovering problems, or you keep finding use cases that don't work, or the thing you thought was a brilliant design is actually a pile of rubbish and you've got to start again. And that's basically one of the issues of software development. You cannot accurately predict exactly when something will be finished with software development, but because publishers need release dates and things like that, marketing needs to hit a release date, you've got to give one. And so you may get to a point where you realise you're just not going to be anywhere close to it, and so you have to delay, or you release a buggy piece of software that you have to patch on day one. Those are just the realities of developing software where you have limited budgets. It's the way in which software development, get all philosophical about it, is kind of a bit like art, because there is that expression with art that art is never finished, it's only ever abandoned. And the same is kind of true with software development. Even now, there are patches being done to Factorio version 1, or 1.1 I guess it is now, and they are months away from releasing version 2, because there are bugs that are being found and that they feel they can fix quickly and easily, or that they fixed in version 2 and so they can just pull that change in. And that that game released, whatever it is now, nearly 4 years ago, 4 years ago, something like that. Do you know what I mean? And that's the sort of problem you have. There is a world in which software is, a piece of software is never actually finished, but you just have to cut it off at some point. And backlog is a reflection of that, basically, which says, right, well, we know we will never finish this piece of software, so let's decide which tasks are the ones we've got to do, the ones we want to do, and the ones we could do if we want, if we have time, and the things we will never do. And so you basically have that approach where you stick a certain number of those onto the backlog and you'll address them if you ever get time. I went off on one there, Anyway, this is also the time when we resumed the weekly Friday Facts, as we felt we had enough to show weekly until the release. It also helped motivate us to finish things so that they can be presented. And just to go almost back to the same point again, one of the problems with not having like a publisher or someone who's, got a check, that they've signed or is, kind of holding the money to ransom in a sense, is that especially if you have a successful game like we did with Factorio, you've got a big pot of cash, and there's a temptation, if you're particularly perfectionist, to just keep developing and iterating and changing and improving and addressing your backlog, etc., rather than getting on and getting it finished. And so the point there essentially is that one of the things is having a Friday Facts gives them a weekly deadline on things. So they might have put space platforms in ages ago, but being able to see, and here's the swanky graphics for space platforms, gives them a deadline to say, right, well, we want to talk about that in 2 weeks' time. Can we get it finished for 2 weeks' time? No. Okay, well, what about 3 weeks? Yeah, we think we can do that. And then it gives you a nice hard deadline saying, right, well, the final version of all the graphics needs to be done for that deadline so that we can talk about it in Friday Facts. And of course you might think, well, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't really. They can always swap around what they're talking about. But then you've got this thing where it's part of the community interaction, in particular with Factorio, where you're getting that instant feedback and you're getting that wow factor going on. People like me rattling on about the awesome things that are coming, and it just helps build hype and therefore sales potentially. So there's always that in the back of your mind, even if you're just focused mostly on the code. The fourth year, 2024. Things coming together. In the fourth year, we finished the second game design iteration. More and more team members also went ahead and finished their playthroughs, which was getting more and more smooth. After that, we made even more shortenifications. Oh dear. After that, we made even more shortenifications, which resulted in the second LAN party playthrough we had a week ago to be finished on day 4 without even trying too hard to speedrun. This was a clear sign that following the guidelines we created 2 years ago had results, and not only was it possible to finish playing the expansion faster, it also felt more fun. The main problem was that, in the last day, we weren't able to continue the multiplayer with everyone connected while having 60 UPS. We had to slow the game down to 85% speed for everyone's computer to be able to keep up. Interesting, so basically they got to the end. It sounds like they were playing all on one game, so I guess, as I say, I'm not sure necessarily be all 30 of them, but 30 people were able to finish the game easily by the sound of things within 4 days, which sounds much more reasonable. But that the performance wasn't great. Okay, so 85% of 60 UPS is about 50-ish UPS, 51, 52, something like that. So that's still perfectly playable. You would notice it being a bit slower, but it's not, it's not on the scale of, 20 UPS megabase. So yeah, it's interesting that obviously could be netcode type things, particularly for unoptimized systems, but it sounds like a lot of optimization is probably needed, because that was a week ago that they did that. That's interesting. Current state. The fluid changes from Friday Facts 416, which was the last one, combined with the foundry from Friday Facts 387, and the fact that trains with molten metals have way higher item density compared to iron and copper plates, makes it possible to make endgame setups be very different compared to the base game endgame. Base game endgame. Interestingly, I wonder if that was like one of the big motivations for improving the fluids then. There was the implication in that Friday Facts that it was kind of because of performance issues that they knew they had to change it, but it sounded like they weren't necessarily keen on biting the bullet and doing something, or picking one of the options essentially in that Friday Fact. So it sounds like perhaps the performance was just so, if they're having to run the game at 85% so that everyone can play it on multiplayer, then clearly fluids must have been one of the big bottlenecks of performance, and so that's why they've improved it. But anyway, the basic point there is that, and we're going to see this in quite a few of these pictures, it appears that basically transporting molten metals is going to be one of the key things to do, because, so I'm slightly skipping ahead with this, but if you see here, we've got the big mining drill mining directly into foundries, and then outputting, and this is calcite coming in, and then it's outputting into a pipe basically. So they're not actually then converting it into iron plate or gears or anything like that. They're literally taking the molten metal away and taking that wherever it needs to go, and we'll see that then being used in other things. So clearly that represents one of the big changes that's possible. I like how the foundry is super strong on its own, and it can alter the way you build, but it only works well as long as you have a steady stream of calcite coming from Volcanus, as it is the only planet where you can mine it. This is the example of when investigating problems like why no iron can lead you all the way to a different planet, and I love it. There's actually a great video, I'll try and link it in the description and stuff, I'll maybe put a card on, by a programmer who kind of explains like the conceptual ways, in a sense, that Factorio is like programming, and it kind of nails it right on the head that it's the type of problem solving you do. And this is like the perfect example of it when you're working out, you've got a problem. I know you're not manufacturing enough trains or something. You sort of sat there and you're going, why haven't I built enough trains, And you look at the machine and it's not got enough iron in, well, maybe iron gear wheels or engines or something like that. And then you work out that those are starved for iron. And you're like, okay, well, why isn't enough iron coming into my make everything area? And so you look at the train and the train isn't there. And you trace the train back and you say, right, well, where is the train filling up with iron? Have I just timed it badly and it's about to arrive? And you go and look at that iron foundry and you find out, well, it's empty, it's not working. And then you work out, oh, well, that's because the belts are empty. There's no calcite coming in. Why is there no calcite coming in? Oh, because the rocket's taking ages to deliver it to the space platform that is bringing the calcite. Or it's got some priority system on it and it's tending to take the calcite to Fulgora or something like that. And so you trace that back and you say, well, do I just need more production? Do I need better modules in the machine? Do I need, more platforms? What's my solution to this problem? And that's kind of one of the core things that makes Factorio so amazing. So I'll try and link that video, but yeah, it kind of hits on the types of problem solving that you do in Factorio and why they're so similar to what makes programming fun fundamentally, and why the two are very closely linked. But yeah, again, this is another thing that really, in a sense, it's the type of thing I've been wanting to hear, because it's great to see all these mechanics and interesting to think about spoilage and all that sort of stuff. But it's nice to have that reassurance that the why is there no iron problem is still the thing that you're solving in the game. Okay then, so we got a series of pictures now, which I think are mostly fairly endgame, mid-late game, endgame type setups. We will talk about them a bit, but as I say, I will do a proper video that goes into all these properly and speculates about them, etc. Because this is already enormous, this video. With the usage of calcite, big mining productivity and foundries, it gets very efficient to turn the mining outposts to molten metal exporters directly. And what we've got going on here, so this sort of brown train is delivering calcite, which is then being delivered to the foundries via belt. I think I almost spoke earlier that there weren't any beacons on it. There are beacons on it, but only a kind of row in the middle. I didn't spot them before. But basically, the foundries, the whole point of this is that they are taking a direct input from big mining drills. The big mining drills, of course, have a very large, you can actually kind of see it because that's clearly the edge of the mining area for the things, for the big mining drills. So effectively, even though all this is covered with stuff, they're going to be mining a lot of this as well. And so you've got these effectively representing, say, I can't remember what the number was it 8 regular mining drills? But they're outputting directly into the foundries. It's almost like going back to a stone smelting, a very, very early game setup where you do direct feed of things into your stone furnaces, because there's no point having a belt and an assembler and all that sort of stuff. You might as well just stick it straight in, even though it's not efficient. Because what you see, obviously this is all backed up by the looks of things, can't tell how full the pipes are, but these guys have their yellow light on, which means that they're not actually able to output, and they're obviously outputting direct into foundries, so the foundries must either have full inputs or be stopped altogether, and they are outputting molten iron, basically. So that's then being put onto trains. So in seeing here that this setup is really about producing molten iron. So presumably these are fluid wagons rather than carriages as such, and that that sending stuff around via molten iron is what is more efficient, is better in a lot of cases than sending the actual, say, plates or gears, because of course that's a resource, that's a product that can be turned into all sorts of different things. So you can imagine having an engine factory or a gear wheels factory or what have you, and then it can go to the station that needs the material the most. And I guess with the maths on that, because each carriage holds, is it 25,000? It's basically like a tank, isn't it? I can never remember the numbers. But basically each tank is holding way more in liquid form, especially because if you then use foundries to turn it into a gear wheel or what have you, you get more prod bonus. So basically giving them more productivity means that it's worth transporting the liquid metal, because you're then effectively increasing the packing density of what's on your trains. So it's not now to do with how many iron plates you can get in, it's how much liquid metal you can get, because you can turn that into even more product at the end of the stream. Next one then says, foundries and electromagnetic plants are a good friend in the game. Notice that each of the outputs is 8 stacked, Friday Facts 393, talking about the stack inserters, green belts. So it is equivalent to 85.3 fully compressed blue belts of production. This is the power of legendary quality. These are level 5 quality, modules and beacons and EMPs and foundries and what have you. So they do have a few beacons on, but the inbuilt, and it's got, I think those are legendary ones in there. I can't really see the blob on the actual prod modules, but the bonuses you're getting out of this are enormous. And I would guess to some extent this is where the fluid, like the benefit of the fluid, comes in, because the EMPs are making the actual green circuits and the foundries are making the iron and the copper wire. And of course with the copper wire you're skipping a step, you're going straight from copper metal to copper wire rather than copper plate, so there's no processing required there. And what they're doing is feeding in the liquid metal, I keep saying liquid metals, the molten metals, and so you're getting that prod bonus, you're getting the incredible density of fluids. With the change to fluids, you're now getting that instantaneous transport, so you don't have to mess about pumps and all of the rubbish you have to currently do to make the thing work properly. So your productivity is gigantic. Now, whether this is designed for a megabase design or not, I'm not sure. I don't know whether 85.3 fully compressed blue belts is like a realistic number of production we would expect in a normal in-game factory, or if this is a big scale in-game factory. It could be that this is their entire green belt production for their entire factory, and then they're just shipping it wherever. Or, this could be making blue circuits or something. So, we don't know what the purpose of this is, but it's interesting that it's such a gigantic volume. What it then says is there is one more building typically combined with the foundry and electromagnetic plants, which will be covered later. So that's confirmation that there is a new building that we haven't seen yet. We kind of know that because there was a previous Friday Facts, and I'm not going to go into it again. You'd see it on a lot of my videos, but where we had the tiny little icons of the buildings. There was also the original announcement Space Age where we got that teaser of the building with the pipes on. It would be interesting if it is that, because that building looks with the pipes like it would handle fluids. And we have already seen that it's, the Gleba building is the one that has like chambers in it and is about bio stuff. So what other building would sort of combine well with these? The elevated production rates can force your rail intersection designs to get crazy. And here we have a super junction of allowing lots and lots of trains to go both across the junction just straight away, but also to take all sorts of routes. So back in Friday Facts 377, when we were talking about the design of the, redesign of the rail pieces, you might remember me talking about this, basically, the Clapham Junction. And I was saying how I wanted to be able to kind of recreate this type of thing. Now, obviously, at that stage, I think they were that way round. I can't remember now. Did we find out about elevated rails after this? I think we did, because this was like the next one. But basically, I was saying how I wanted to make Clapham Junction type setups. where there are just mad spaghettis of rail going all sorts of places. And I'd quite like to do a lot more direct rails, basically, so that, you've got rails that connect your iron production and your whatever, belt production or what have you. And then it's more like a direct connection, but it has to pass through other rail sets, and it has because at the moment, the whole main line thing to me is a little bit boring, but it's kind of the only like space viable solution. And the elevated rails make that really possible. And that this is the type of thing I want to be doing with rails. Obviously, this is very endgame, huge factory that it's supporting, etc., etc. But this type of, it's not chaos and it's not really spaghetti as such, but there's a lot of built for the purpose type stuff. Rather than, I couldn't imagine this being a blueprint, effectively. That's what I'm sort of getting at, is that this has been built because they've realised, right, well, we need 8 to 8 to 8 to 8 crossroads, and this is how I'm going to get that done. And the elevated rails kind of make that type of thing possible, and that's what I'm after. The low stack size of coal and of stone, combined with the inability to melt them, makes their processing special in a way. So here we see we've got a coal mine, and it's got big mining drills on it with what look like level 5 speed modules in, and they're outputting. There's almost, I'm not entirely sure, but I think these might be like a pair of miners is effectively filling a green belt type level of output. I haven't really traced the things through, but it does look like that. That'd be amazing if it is. So basically that's all putting out there. And what they're actually making here are grenades. And they're using the foundry again with liquid iron in order to produce the iron plates. And then the assembler is making the grenades. Since you can't push simple grid-like blueprints in the early stages of Volcanus, combined with the difficult terrain, it makes unique outposts. And this is an outpost, so they've got a train coming in and going, basically. So there is very much, this is just to collect sulfuric acid. I think we had confirmation already, but these are clearly the geysers, the sulfur geysers, where they are using the regular pumping jack on the geysers in order to extract the sulfuric acid. It's a little bit of a shame we're not getting a new building, but it seems it would be, I guess, a pointless building in a sense, a single-use building, so might as well just repurpose that one. But it has got, beacons on it, which is interesting, so I don't know if that suggests maybe this is kind of an old patch that they're just trying to suck as much stuff out of as they can. What's particularly interesting about it is the laser turrets and the number of laser turrets. Obviously, if this is late game, you would expect the biters to be quite evolved, but that's quite a lot of laser turrets where you would expect you would have to have quite a lot of laser power boosts having been researched. But basically, yeah, I mean, we've got rows and rows of laser turrets. They're also lined up, you notice, in such a way as taking advantage of the terrain. So the biters would be funneled into this area, so they focused the lasers there. Not so much on this side, but obviously we don't know what's going on at the top there. But yeah, it's a lot of lasers for, an outpost. I'm guessing it's really stinky as well, but it also, the basic point of that, it kind of confirms that there are biters on Volcanus. I can't see any other reason why they'll be there, because if there is the lava worm that we've been speculating about, there's no lava around here, so why would you need all these lasers close by? So it feels like there are going to be biters on Volcanus. The other thing, which is a little puzzling, is that there are 4 radars, which is interesting. That's a lot of radar coverage and a lot of, continuously active sectors and all that sort of stuff for what is an outpost. So it feels like maybe they're doing some more intense scanning, and maybe this isn't an old outpost, but a relatively new one. And they're trying to reveal more of the map as quick as they can. The last picture could give you a glimpse into the possible scale of the game at the very end. These bulk inserters, what used to be stack inserters, are being mass transported to another planet as an ingredient to create the legendary stack inserters. From Friday Facts 393. Yeah, so, I mean, we've got literally dozens of rockets going here, and as mentioned earlier, this provides me with a bit of like reassurance that the tweaks they've made to the recipe for rockets, which you can actually see, I'm not going to zoom in on this one. We'll do it on the other video. But, it's blue circuits, rocket fuel, and low density structures. There are no RCUs anymore. So we also know we're getting easier ways and quicker ways and more productive ways to make certainly blue circuits and RCUs. So, not RCUs, low density structures. So, yeah, it looks like the fears I was having that the scale of rocket production would be a bit of a hefty challenge is probably not realised, which is good because this is kind of what you want, isn't it? You want, what's that? It's at least 12, 24, 36, 48, 54, 60. So it's at least very minimum 60 rockets launching, bulk inserters into space. That's that's Factorio in a nutshell. The third iteration is happening just now. The main focus is on the vast amount of feedback we got from the last LAN party. It is going to be focused on two main categories. Firstly, bugs, quality of life features, and balancing. Secondly, optimizations. The factory just got bigger in Space Age, and we need to use some programmer magic to make it smooth. Since things are getting stable, and I'm starting to be pretty happy with the state of the game now, we are ready to give a specific date of the Space Age release, which we will tell you next week. As always, let us know your thoughts at the usual places. Right, so speculation. I am going to record this now and get it in the can, but I'm expecting to have to make this into a separate video. I did go a bit of speculation as we were going along, so I will include that in those sections. You'll have to go and dig it out, I'm afraid. I'm not going to chop it all up. But basically, I mean, to give the overall reaction, it's really nice to see this kind of Friday Facts. I'll be honest, it feels like maybe it should have been after the thing. I mean, I get why it's now, because it is still talking about development in progress, but it feels like a GDC talk almost of how we did the expansion. But basically, I mean, it's great. I love this type of thing. I love to see what the progression was, what the thinking was, and all that sort of stuff. These are often my favorite type of Friday Facts. I say, I love watching GDC talks as well about why they did a thing and what the problems were and all that sort of stuff and how they solved them. So yeah, so I love it basically. There is a lot of stuff, as I say, in these that we'll dig into in the proper speculation. But overall, great to see. It's also nice to get that suggestion that there is another building coming. One of the things I've been wondering about, if you say, for example, here, right, you're building 85.3 green belts for production. Now, I think you can make red circuits via the EMP and blue circuits via the EMP. I think it kind of stops at intermediates. I think from what I am remembering, and please correct me if I've got this all badly remembered, I think that the Foundry and the EMP are really about making up to intermediate products. They also do their local science packs and all that sort of stuff, so it's not quite that fixed. But they're mostly focused on, gears and green circuits and things like that. So I'm wondering if there is some super building that is effectively a super manufacturing building. So it's not quite a assembly machine level 4. It's not quite that. It's some different building, but it's able to make, and I have a feeling engines can actually be made in foundries, but it might be able to make like higher level intermediates, but also end products. Because it's all very well producing 85.3 blue belts worth of green circuits. If you have to then, and this is coming back to the performance issue, this tiny little setup is making that so it's a real benefit to UPS to kind of compress it all into this limited number of buildings, especially with so few inserters and stuff, that if you don't have a machine on the other end that can take green circuits and make yellow inserters and blue inserters or I guess yellow belts and yellow inserters for science packs and like the more end product things. So belts, that a machine that can take all of these circuits and turn them into green, although green belts is foundry only, isn't it? So turn them into blue belts or bits of rail, that can, make rail incredibly quickly or, that basically steps up the end product production then you're going to end up with gigantic, fields of assemblers in order to make everything. Because we know that, the foundry can make science packs and therefore boost the productivity of that science pack production. Presumably the same is true for Gleba. I don't know if we've had confirmation of that, but we do know the same is true for the Fulgora building. So for Nauvis and potentially Aquila, what is boosting the production of red science packs, green science packs, blue science packs? Because all we know about is the regular assembler. We don't have a super assembler that we know of that can make, with the prod bonus, other science packs. And that's my speculation, is that there is actually another building. It could be the one with the pipes on it, but there is another building that is going to be the equivalent productivity boost for the other science packs, effectively, and the other manufacturing. So if you want to absolutely thump out, mining drills or roboports, maybe something like that, you want to massively output them because you're going to need to, then at the moment you're stuck with regular assemblers. Now you're not, because there's quality, but of course quality is optional. So it feels like there needs to be another machine to do end stage manufacturing. And that would obviously tie up very well with the foundry and the EMP. Now, as I say, to me it feels like there's a piece missing here, which is like another machine because if you notice, you've got two foundries. One foundry is feeding two assembly machines, and I assume that's balanced. The belts look pretty full. In fact, that one's completely empty for some reason. I wonder if there's an error in the belt there. No, it looks like the pipe might be empty. But yeah, so it feels like there's a machine missing here that can make the grenades, and that, perhaps the opposite way round, it'd be two foundries feeding one assembly machine. But I say that's just a really very random guess. But this is an awful lot of grenade production, so this has got to be the megabase scale military science, for endgame, because, as I say, that is a lot of... Because it's actually using the stack inserter, and obviously, I don't know what they're stacked to, but, that could be up to, is it 4 items in a stack, and then it's green belt. So this is an incredible number of grenades, which can only be feeding into military science, unless we're going to get a grenade thrower. As I keep pointing out, there is this green building here that we still don't know anything about. We got to see another new building in a tease, and also this one, so it does look like this is still there, but we've not seen it. To me, this doesn't look like the sort of building that would be paired well with the EMP and the foundry, in the sense of, I was describing it, as we were going along, about it, making end of the line materials, so about it making roboports and that sort of thing. It still looks to me like a fluid processing building. Now that would work well in concert, if you were trying to make plastics and all that sort of stuff. But the implication to me was that the Gleba building is going to sort of do some of that, and that really plastics and stuff are really about being exported rather than using the extra machine, and that maybe there is like a properly new machine we've not even had any hint of, and that represents the... Well, there's Aquila. We don't know anything about Aquila at all. That could be the Aquila building, and that it applies in a retroactive sense, because Aquila is that you've won the game, now do the infinite science with the infinite science pack. If you want to do a mega base, this is your chance type of thing. So is that, as I say, what you build at the end, that is the end goal, is the super manufactory, which can absolutely hammer out science packs instead of you having to produce, as I say, because we're getting a weird situation where you need to use, the Fulgora one, the Gleba one, the Volcanus one, but you've got these amazing machines that can give you massive productivity boosts. We don't have that for the Nauvis/Aquila science packs that we know of. So you would end up with, 10 foundries making the orange science pack, and then 500 assemblers doing the same thing. obviously you can quality scale them, but you can quality scale the foundry. So it sort of feels like there's a gap emerging that if I want to just use 10 machines to make the same amount of red science packs, well, actually you can, because the red science packs are so easy. Let's maybe say purple science packs or something like that. We don't have it. We don't have that machine that can do what the foundry and the EMP can do. And also, I keep forgetting about the bioreactor, but they can all do bonus productivity for their science packs. We can't do that at the moment in the equivalent way for red, green, blue, purple, gold, military. So where's that machine, basically? And I think that's the machine that's being hinted at. There's a lot that reassures me in this, that the types of challenges, the types of things that I like to do are really still there and that they're still important. I didn't doubt that they would be, but obviously we've focused a lot on new mechanics, new things, new bits and pieces, spoilage, all of that, those types of things, and yet boils down to the core thing of why no iron? That to me is Factorio. So yeah, it's nice to have that assurance that a lot of that is still really the core of the game. I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts video and might consider coming back for another one. If you'd like to chat about the latest Factorio Friday Facts, you can find me live streaming Factorio every weekend over on my Twitch channel, Reassurance. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Our story starts in February 2020.